Wetlands of the World, written by Edward Allen Kurtz.
Contents at a glance.
What is a wetland? Is it land that is wet? Yes, but it's more than that. When it rains, land becomes wet, but later the land is dry again. But a wetland stays wet for long periods of time. A wetland is an area of land where water permanently covers the soil, or it can be wet during some seasons and dry during other seasons. A wetland is the home of aquatic plants, plants that can grow in water and wet soil. There are also many animals that live in wetlands. Wetlands also help keep the earth healthy. Let's learn more about wetlands. How a wetland helps keep the earth healthy. Wetlands are important areas of land covered with water. One of the ways they help the earth is that they help to filter water and make it pure. Things like aquatic plants that live in a wetland can remove poisons from the water. Another thing that wetlands do is that they help to control flooding. If there is a lot of rain, a wetland can store excess water so that rivers don't overflow their banks and cause flooding. Wetlands are also important in coastal areas because they help to keep the shoreline stable. These are called tidal wetlands. Types of wetlands. There are several kinds of wetlands. They can be freshwater, saltwater, or brackish. Brackish means water that is more saline than freshwater, but not as saline as saltwater. Wetlands can be tidal. These are near a sea or ocean. Non-tidal wetlands are not near a sea or ocean, but are found along streams and rivers. Wetlands can be permanently covered with water or only covered with water during some seasons of the year. Wetlands can be found from warm tropical areas near the equator to cold tundra areas. Types of wetlands. Swamps. A swamp is a type of wetland that is forested. This just means that trees grow in them as well as other kinds of plants. Swamps can be either true swamps, which are called swamp forests, or transitional swamps called shrub swamps. Swamps can be found along big rivers or on the shores of large lakes. Swamps can be covered with fresh water, salt water, or brackish water. The water in a swamp either moves slowly or is stagnant, which means it doesn't move at all. There are swamps on every continent except Antarctica. Types of wetlands. Marshes. A marsh is a type of wetland that does not have woody plants like the trees in a swamp. Instead, it has herbaceous plants. These are simple plants with stems and leaves. In a marsh, these plants are usually grasses, weeds, and rushes. Some examples of marsh plants are cattails, papyrus, sawgrass, and sedges. If there are any woody plants in a marsh, they will only be small bushes, not big trees. Marshes can be found next to streams, rivers, and lakes. They serve as a barrier between bodies of water and the dry land. Types of wetlands. Bogs. A bog is a type of wetland that is a mire. A mire is a wetland where there are no trees. A mire can also be called a peatland because it has plants that form peat. Peat is a brown material like soil, but it is made up of decayed plants. Peat is very useful. It can be cut and dried and used as fuel, and it can be used in gardens to make the soil healthier. Peat also helps to take away carbon dioxide from the air. Scientists tell us that there is too much carbon dioxide in the air, so this makes peat and bogs very important to the Earth's health. Types of wetlands. Fens. A fen is a type of low wetland. It can be partly or entirely covered with water. Bogs and fens are both types of mires. These are peatlands that have plants that produce peat. A fen is covered in water that has lots of minerals in it. A fen has several kinds of plants. These include brown mosses, grasses, sedges, and even some carnivorous plants. Fens are usually found along lakes and rivers where there are not very many woody plants like trees and shrubs. If beavers build dams, this can cause flooding. This can damage a fen. Famous wetlands. The Pantanal, Brazil. The Pantanal is the biggest wetland of any type in the world. It is about 50,000 to 75,000 square miles and lies mostly in western Brazil, but spills into Bolivia and Paraguay. The Pantanal gets its name from a Portuguese word, pantano, which means wetland. There are 3,500 different kinds of plants that live here. There are many types of grasses and trees. Amazingly, there are over 10,000 different kinds of animals that live in the Pantanal. These include deer, giant river otters, macaws, eagles, tapirs, and anteaters. Famous wetlands. The Sundarabans, Bangladesh. The Sundarabans cover an area of almost 4,000 square miles, mostly in Bangladesh and partly in India. It is the largest tidal mangrove forest in the world and lies on the Bay of Bengal, which is a part of the Indian Ocean. Mangroves are trees and shrubs that live in saline water along coastal areas. Sundarban means beautiful forest in the Bengali language. There are many waterways and small islands in this beautiful forest. It is the home of many animals, including about 270 Bengal tigers, one of the largest groups in the world. Famous wetlands. The Okavango Delta, Botswana. The Okavango Delta is a large wetland area in Botswana in Africa. A delta is the area at the mouth of a river where it usually flows into an ocean or sea. But the Okavango Delta is a special kind of delta. It is called an inland delta because it does not flow into a sea or ocean. Instead, the water evaporates. This is an example of a seasonal wetland. It is not wet all year long. Rain causes the Okavango River to flood, and this is where the water for this wetland comes from. Animals include elephants, giraffes, hippos, and rhinos. Famous wetlands. The Everglades, U.S. The Everglades are tropical wetlands at the southern end of the U.S. state of Florida. During the rainy season, water from Lake Okeechobee slowly flows south in a river that is about 60 miles wide and more than 100 miles long. This huge, slow-moving river flows into the Florida Bay at the southern end of Florida. There are many kinds of plants in the Everglades, including sawgrass, mangrove trees, cypress, and pines. Some of the animals that live here are alligators, birds, crabs, crocodiles, fish, frogs, shrimp, snakes, toads, and turtles. Famous wetlands. The Kakadu Wetlands, Australia. The Kakadu Wetlands are part of the Kakadu National Park in the Northern Territory of Australia and is about the size of Switzerland. Its name, Kakadu, comes from the indigenous people of Australia, the Aborigines. The Kakadu Wetlands are an example of a seasonal wetland. They are covered with water for just part of the year because of the heavy rains. Plants include mangroves, rushes, sedges, and water lilies. There are many birds here as well as freshwater and saltwater crocodiles, water buffalo, and wild horses. Famous wetlands. The Camargue, France. The Camargue wetland in southern France is the largest river delta in Europe. It lies between the Rhone River Delta and the Mediterranean Sea. This area is made up of brine lagoons, lakes, marshes, and sandbars. Plants include glasswort, reeds, and sea lavender. The Camargue wetland is a popular place for birds to live. There are over 400 different kinds of birds in this wetland. It is one of the few places in Europe where a bird called the greater flamingo lives. There are also Camargue cattle and Camargue horses. Interesting facts. Wetlands often act as a barrier between land and water. Wetlands are moist and humid, so they make good homes for certain types of plants and animals. People only recently began to understand the importance of wetlands. Before this, many wetlands were drained so that they could be used for other purposes. Wetlands are home to about 30% of the world's plants. Some kinds of birds live in wetlands all year long, while other types of birds are migratory and only live in wetlands part of the year. Some migratory birds use wetlands as a rest stop during their long migrations. Many people enjoy visiting wetlands because of all the different kinds of wildlife that can be seen there. Some wetland plants grow underwater like eelgrass and seagrass. Most wetlands were made by nature, but there are some man-made wetlands. Many types of fish and seafood come from wetland areas. Wetlands are often planted with rice, which needs a lot of water to grow. Most of the wetlands in the U.S. are fresh water. About 6% of the Earth's land surface is covered with wetlands. The platypus is an animal that is endemic to eastern Australia and that lives in wetland areas.